Hey, how you doing? Welcome, America. And also joining us today is our friends up there in Canada. You know, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. All month, mental health advocates, prevention organizations, survivors, allies, and community members unite to promote suicide prevention awareness. Did you also know that this week right now is National Suicide Prevention Week? It's Monday through Sunday surrounding World Suicide Prevention Day, and it's a time to share resources and stories as well as promote suicide prevention awareness. World Suicide Prevention Day is September 10th, and it's a time to remember those affected by suicide, to raise awareness, and to focus efforts on directing treatment to those who need it most. Today's program is being brought to you by StreamYard. Put the power of live streaming to work for your business, your brand, or your cause. We're streaming live on StreamYard right now. And this is how it works. So you can StreamYard live to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Periscope, and the like. Go to StreamYardCause.com. That's StreamYardCause.com. Sign up and get a free account and also get a $10 credit. That's StreamYardCause.com. My guest today is a certified life coach who specializes in supporting individuals and families living with mental health challenges, as well as those moving forward after loss. She holds a BA in psychology from York University and is a certified professional coactive coach, a professional certified coach, a mental health first aid certification holder through the Mental Health Commission of Canada. She's also a trained mindful-based stress reducer. In addition to coaching, she's a motivational speaker who shares her story of becoming widowed at age 34 when her husband died by suicide, and how she navigated her way through stigma, shame, and her own mental health challenges to rebuild her life intentionally. She is the mother of two beautiful boys and is joining us today from her home in Toronto, Canada. Friends, let's welcome Michelle Anhang.
Hello.
Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I love Canada in the fall. A couple of years ago, actually, it's more years than that, maybe 8-9 years ago, I spent a September in Montreal and Quebec. And then a few years ago, spent the fall in Toronto. So I love Toronto and Montreal and Quebec, especially in the fall. There's nothing more beautiful than the leaves and the changing seasons that remind us, that summer is over and winter is just over the horizon. How is life for you and the boys up there in Toronto right now? What's going on?
Life is good. I mean, it's a little cold today. And, thanks for reminding me that winter's coming.
I don't need to remind you about winter.
Nasty here. but yes, fall is beautiful. Oh, can't hear you. Can't hear you. There you are.
All right. How about now?
Now I can hear you loud and clear.
That's the beauty of live.
Awesome.
All right. Take two. So joining us is Michelle Anhang from Toronto, Canada. Thank you for being patient during those technical difficulties. That's live TV. So as we were saying.
Great. Let's move on from the weather.
Life in Toronto with you and the boys.
Life is good. Just got my boys off to university, so happy to have some space in the house now. It's been a bit tight here for the last 6 months with everybody being in the house all on top of each other. And then when we had the option for them to go back to school, it was like, yeah, go. Even though one of my kids is online only classes, he's still he's got to be in his apartment. I need my space. We all need our space. It's the healthier way to be.
As long as it's not too much space.
Yeah.
This is a very difficult conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on. Here it is, National Suicide Prevention Month and Awareness Month. Actually, this is National Suicide Prevention Week. I mean, this is such a powerful topic, one that is very near and dear to my heart. As we talked about in the pre-show 11 years ago, I attempted suicide and have my own personal strong feelings about what drives someone to that. And I just thought it would be very powerful to get the perspective of someone who's left behind from suicide. And you have just such a powerful perspective. And it's not that you just have that perspective, you've done something with it. You become an advocate for mental health, and you're doing great things to help people. Take us back to that time when this became very personal for you.
Yeah. I mean, I can go back a little further than when he passed, but about 2.5 years. So I guess this was about 16 or 17 years ago. My husband was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and a form of schizophrenia. He was already pretty advanced in the illnesses by the time he received the diagnosis. And, as with most mental illnesses, they look to, what medication will work for you. And so, he became a bit of a guinea pig because, they don't know exactly like, oh, this is what you have. You take 2 of these and, call me in 10 days kind of thing. It's a bit of a trial and error. And it's usually more than one medication that people need. So there's the cocktail, finding the right cocktail, the right mixtures, the doses, all of that. And essentially, during that time, he wasn't getting any better. The medications weren't helping. He was losing hope, though he didn't ever talk about suicide. He was frustrated. It was pretty apparent that he was frustrated. But again, he also never talked about suicide. So when it happened, it came as a complete shock. I was always worried that, as the disease was progressing, that he might accidentally hurt himself or someone else. But I never thought that this was going to be an intentional act until it happened. And complete shock. I remember, getting, he called me right before he passed and, said, I love you, but my brain is bad. I'm not getting any better. And he thought this was the thing to do for the family and, hung up on me before I could stop him. And, I called 911 and, he was actually in New York at the time. So he wasn't even in the same country. So calling 911, somehow I think they were able to trace him through the phone towers. But I got a call back from the police not too long after, and they had found him. And just complete shock. I was devastated. I didn't believe it was happening. I just kept thinking, I'm going to wake up soon. This is not happening to me.
Take us through what it was like to live with someone that was going through that. You said that there weren't necessarily a lot of signs indicating that was going to happen. I know we've got viewers and listeners now that are probably living with someone who's going through tough times, not only just because it's COVID, it's, life is just challenging enough, let alone all the things that have been piled on top of us in 2020. What are some of the things that others should look for, be aware of, that as you now look in retrospect, you're saying, God, maybe there were some signs, or maybe there wasn't. Tell us more about those
Yeah.
months leading up to this.
Um, so I know that mental illness manifests itself differently. Like there are overall similarities and in diagnoses or symptoms, but it does manifest differently in different people. And but his bipolar disorder for him looked like days in bed where he just could not get up. He didn't have the energy. He was very down on himself. And then he would shift out of that and then move into a cycle of what they call the manic side of it, where he was on top of the world and super happy. And so it's so hard, without as the family member who's so close to it, it's like, oh wow, he's finally feeling better, he's out. But then it was like, okay, he's out and he hasn't come home yet, and what's going on? And often there's risky behavior that's involved in that, or risk taking. I know of people who, whose partners, and they didn't see it happening either, that was the manic disorder of like, they'd go out and start a new business and like put a lot of money into the business. And, so it looks differently, it manifests differently. And it's hard to say, like, it's easy when the person is at home and in bed and complaining and, there you can see the illness, but when they are full of energy and full of life, it's only when oh, this might be a manic episode happening, and it goes to the extreme, that it's hard to tell, like, when are they in a good mood and when is it that extreme end. For him, towards the very end, the extreme end was not being able to sleep at all, like being up for 3-4 days at a time without sleeping. Sometimes he'd just be walking the streets. Like I remember, he would. I remember him one night, or it was morning. He had gone. I'd gone to bed. He had left and called me at like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and he was like, "I've just been walking the streets all night," like, because he didn't know what else to do with himself. So that was the bipolar disorder, and then the schizophrenia were voices in his head, and he only shared a little bit about that. A few times he didn't really talk about it. It was really more at the end of his life where he told me that the voices were telling him to do things, and he couldn't. He would try to resist, but he couldn't, because they were just so strong and so overpowering. This was also at a time, I guess it was 14 years ago. Facebook was not around then. You can go to support groups and in person, but information was not as available as it is now. I find that, like, you can go on Facebook, on any social media, and find memes and find groups and find so much information that makes it accessible for the average person. For me, I was given pamphlets and brochures and read stuff, and it just, I was working 2 jobs, had 2 tiny kids. When he passed, they were 7 and 4, but my younger one, I think, was about 18 months at the time it happened. So because my husband wasn't working, I was working 2 jobs. So it was just like, I don't have a lot of time to sit and read all this. Just kind of give me the rundown, which, was not enough information. But I think, for other people who are in a situation with somebody that they're fearing has some kind of mental illness, is not doing well, the best advice I can give is trust your gut. Like, really trust your intuition, educate yourself, like Google whatever you can. Facebook, again, like I mentioned, there's so many groups out there, so many support groups available, where you can even post questions of like, hey, this is what I think is going on, and you can get advice. You can get, there are hotlines now. So there is a lot of information out there. So definitely educate yourself. But at the end of the day, if you're worried, trust your gut.
Well, I just send all the positive love and vibe that I can, because it's hard for me to hear what you're saying, because I know what I've put my I can say this collectively, my spouses through because of my anxiety, my bipolar, my depression. I can't really even imagine what it's like to live with that. How did you cope?
Mm.
How did you
Autopilot.
cope with what? Let's just maybe even take a couple of those um, individually, but how do you deal with a spouse that has bipolar? Because relationships are tough with someone who has bipolar.
Yeah. Um, it was challenging. Even before he went into psychosis and had lost touch with reality, um, it was very challenging. And I'm very transparent when I say I did not cope well. I went into autopilot. I took on the typical, what they call codependent behaviors, where it was just like, okay, let me see what I can manage or fix. So, monitoring his medication and all those things. And, there's this belief that we have as the loved ones that somehow if we love them enough and if we do enough that we can make them better, which puts this huge burden on us where we keep feeling like we need to be doing more because our love is somehow not healing them, and we don't get that. So it's a lot of pressure, and there was also a lot of resentment. I was upset. Here I am. Working my butt off and with these two kids, and it's hard to see him. It was hard to see him in bed, and it's just like, please just get up, just feed them or just do something because I'm working. And he really couldn't. But being in it in that moment, it was so challenging. And really for me, the only way I managed to cope was really just I kicked into survival mode. I was on autopilot. It was like, okay, one step at a time, not even one day at a time. It was really a minute at a time because I didn't know what his moods would be like, how they would shift, what was going on. A lot of walking on eggshells because I was so afraid of setting him off one way or another. So there was fear, there was resentment, there were, a lot of unpleasant emotions, definitely on my end. And, I couldn't see the light there. It was just so much darkness, and I didn't know any way out.
Ultimately, how did you cope?
I just stopped feeling. That was really it. I know I went into my own fits of depression as well. I didn't even cry. Like, I didn't even let myself feel because I was so afraid that if I started crying, it just like the floodgates would open and they would never close. And I just had too much to do. I did at one point go for, I did group therapy. I did personal, individual therapy as well. But again, I was just not letting myself go near any of those emotions just because I was so afraid of falling apart if I let myself feel. And I just felt like I couldn't afford to because I was the one that was holding up the fort.
And I can understand how resentment would be such a strong emotion and all that because you fall in love with someone, you get married, you have big goals and you have big dreams, and then you're like, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was not part of the plan. That's for sure.
I mean, life happens when we have other plans, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what would you say to spouses that are going through these dark nights of the soul on their own because of who they're married to?
Yeah. I mean, my heart goes out to all of you. It's not easy. And I think, what I wish I had done back then was talk about what I was going through. Um, we both um, we both felt a lot of shame around the mental illness. We both grew up in the same community. We actually knew each other since we were kids. And it was a community that did not talk about mental illness, did not talk about suicide. It was just one of those things. It was just, you kind of sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away on its own. So even when my husband stopped working, nobody knew. Like we made up excuses. Like he was working in security alarms, and he drove a truck, and when he gave the truck back because he had to stop working, people would ask, and we just said, oh no, he got a promotion, he's a manager now, so he's not on the road. Like we lied left, right, and center. So I think my advice is don't lie, for one thing, because it's not helping anybody. And find anyone and everyone that you can to support you, to really be there with you through all of this, and especially if you can find some kind of support groups where they understand these feelings, because not everyone is very accepting of these unpleasant emotions that we feel of, if it's anger or resentment. There's guilt as well, and that goes along with the suicide as well. So having people around that know what it's like, that have been through it, is extremely helpful, because there's no judgment. And often you will find people as well that have not experienced it, that don't have judgment. But the one thing I say to my clients and anyone going through that is be discerning about who you talk to. So if certain people don't understand mental health or mental illness, they may not be the ones to be talking to. And I know in my situation, like, it was only the immediate family and a few friends who knew, and the family was a lot of people in the older generations that don't think mental illness is a thing, and they just feel like, well, just tell him to get up, tell him to go for a walk, tell him to exercise, or just would not even acknowledge it was happening. So those people couldn't be any kind of support for me. But again, there's so much more access to information, to groups, online groups. Now because of the pandemic, I think most in-person classes, groups, those kinds of things have moved online. So more than ever, you can just search it up and find. You can find any country, any time zone you're in. You'll find a group online that you can join, and keep going.
Well, and you're so right. There is such a stigma, and with that stigma comes shame, guilt, all those other negative emotions that you're talking about. And if our spouse had cancer or leukemia or something else, it just has a different feel when people rally around to try to help them. But I know from my own experience, when you actually admit what's going on, people don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to deal with that. And so I don't think they meant to, but people step back and they step out of your life because they just don't know how to communicate, how to help, how to be supportive. What have you learned over the number of years now about this stigma of mental health?
What have I learned? I learned that we need to get over it. That's for sure.
How do you mean get over it?
I think it's the judgment that we, I think we all carry little pieces of judgment around it. And I know that I did too. Even though, I have my own, I have depression, I have anxiety, and I judged myself for it. So, when we're judging ourselves for these things, it's really hard to feel empathy for other people who are experiencing it. So I think one thing, the first thing to look at is noticing our own biases and our own judgments around it. And I've learned that so many people can't be with, I think the word that comes up is darkness. Like they feel like that's like, oh, it's so dark. Like people were saying to me, like, do you have to talk about it all the time? Because like I was doom and gloom, and, people that have not done their own work on themselves, and can't be with their own darkness, can't be with other people's either, which is something that I learned the hard way. And and I also learned to have compassion. And of course, it's taken me a long time to get to that place, but compassion for people's discomfort for it as well, rather than judging them, just saying like, okay, you know what, they're suffering in their own way because they can't be with this, and trying to, not to excuse it, but me getting angry at them about it doesn't help either. So, really, I think the more I talk about it, is healing for me every single time I show up and talk about it. It normalizes it, because look, at the end of the day, we have the stats, which I think are way, way lower than the reality. And just like my one realization of that came when I went on medication for the first time for depression, and I started telling people, oh yeah, I went on, and they're like, oh, me too. What are you taking? And what's your dose? And it was like, oh my God, everybody's on something. So I think the stats are higher, and I think we just need to normalize it the same way we can talk about having a stomach flu or the cold, or or cancer, where it's like, we share it, we talk about it, and we get through it. We need to talk about our experiences, just so that if people realize like just how prevalent these mental health challenges really are. Like I don't know anybody who is immune to it. I don't know anyone who has not been impacted, either personally or through a very close family member. So if we're all experiencing this, then why are we judging it? And why aren't we talking about it? Like, why are we still hiding it?
Don't you think that's partly because of pride?
Yeah.
That I'm not broken and you're broken, and ooh, we can't talk about that. How did you deal with the anger? So you're 34 years old. Your boys are 4 years old and 7 years old. You were the breadwinner before he took his life, and now he's gone, and your world was turned upside down. Walk us through how you came back and walked through that.
Yeah, that was a long journey. I shoved a lot of feelings down, which resulted in my depression. And everything in my life was kind of, and I'm not sure if we touched on it, but we also told everybody that it was an accident. We didn't say that he died by suicide because of the shame around it. So
let's talk
maybe we should talk about that first.
So what, at the risk of being too personal, tell us what happened, and then what was the cover story, and how did that maybe not serve you now looking back?
Yeah. Happy to share that, because I know so many people are in the same boat of hiding, whether it's a suicide or something else. Every time I speak, about my experience, I get people messaging me about, this is what I'm hiding. So yeah, within hours of my husband passing, the close family was gathering, and one of my family members turned and said, "What are we going to tell people?" And it was like, "Oh yeah, what are we going to tell people?" Because of course, I'm dealing with all of my emotions, and feeling ashamed of the anger that I'm feeling a lot of guilt of like, did I do everything I could to save him? Could this somehow be my fault? Putting so much of it on myself. And so, yeah, then they kind of said, hey, why don't we say it was an accident? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. And, we told everybody that's what the story is. And of course, not even of course, it's, now that I think back on it, it's pretty amazing how, there must have been at least 20 people in the room at the time, and everyone's like, oh yeah, of course. Like not one person said, no, that's a bad idea. And, not that it was anyone's responsibility, but it was just, so interesting to see how everybody kind of felt relieved to be able to say it was an accident. And we didn't go into detail about the accident. We just said it was an accident. And amazingly enough, people, I guess, I'll say humans in our need to make meaning and understand things, a lot of different stories came up around it. One was that he was, a pedestrian that was hit by a car. Then he was a pedestrian that was hit by a bus. Then he was a passenger in a car. Like the stories kind of went on. And I, didn't say anything. I was, dealing with a whole lot more, and I was not going to correct people on a lie. I just, let it be. So having this depression of like not even being able to grieve the suicide, I'm pretending to be grieving an accident, which is very different. I had to shove down all my emotions. I took on this idea that like, okay, I've got one chance to do it right with my kids, so I better do it right. And it was just, again, I was like the master of autopilot. I could achieve a lot in that space. No, couldn't, not without crashing. But it took a huge toll on my mental health. In addition to the depression, I was also constantly anxious because I was worried word was going to get out somehow. Somebody might accidentally tell my kids, because they were 7 and 4 at the time, and I couldn't wrap my head around how and why this happened. I was like, how do I even explain it to my kids? So again, that was one more justification for me to continue telling the lie. And I was walking around carrying, that giant elephant in the room. It was like taking up a whole lot of space in my life. And I was really just, designing everything from this very unhealthy space. And, I was, in unhealthy relationships after that. I was in a job that was, it was great. It was secure, but it was also not what I wanted to be doing. But I stayed in it because I thought, well, I should just be grateful that I have this job. Like I didn't, I was tolerating so much in my life because I felt like, wow, I'm a liar, and, I'm going through all of this and I don't really deserve better. I was so hard on myself. Really for me, I reached a point where I was just in so much pain, and it was around the time of my 45th birthday. And I was just like, I can't live the next half of my life like this. Like this is just like, it's too much. Like, and I made the commitment that I was going to do what it took to heal, because I realized like, the pain that comes from healing could not be any worse than the 10 years. And it was literally almost 11 years of carrying the secret around and living this lie. It was just like, yeah, it can't get worse than that. And yes.
What was that pivot point when you decided to start living the truth and tell your boys what really happened, and for the family and extended family to admit that it was suicide and wasn't an accident?
So, I reached that point and started doing therapy. Did a lot of intense work around my shame, which also, I grew up in a family that was very shame driven. So me adopting the shame was not so unusual. Like I understood where it came from. So I had to do a lot of work around my self-identity, around my self-loathing, around my shame. And had an amazing therapist to help me heal all of those pieces. I also did trauma therapy. So there's something called EMDR, which is amazing work. It basically reprograms memories in your brain so that you are not as triggered by them. It's very helpful when you have PTSD. I also did somatic work. Like I said, I was going to do whatever it took. And, I don't recommend that course for everyone, at least not all at the same time, because it was super, super intensive. But I do that when I'm just like, okay, I need to resolve this. Then it was, I was all in. And had done my coaches training where there was a lot of, work on ourselves as well, that helped me see a lot of the stories that I was telling myself that were not true about myself, just my self-limiting beliefs. I did a leadership program as well. So all of these things that were helping me get out of my own way. And finally just reached a point where I was like, this isn't me. This isn't my shame. And I don't want to carry this anymore. And so I made the decision to tell my kids. And again, going back to the idea of support, I pulled together, a group of friends that I knew that could really be there for me during, what was, I think that was probably the scariest moment of my life. Like you'd think like my husband dying, that was pretty scary, but I was terrified that I was going to tell my kids the truth. They were 15 and 18 at the time, and I might lose them forever, that they were going to hate me for lying to them. They would feel that their whole life was a lie. And I had a few people also that knew the truth that were also like, this is what's going to happen. It's like, thank you. But, I think they thought they were being helpful, but it didn't help. So, it just kind of added to my fear. So that was probably the most courageous thing that I had ever done was sitting my kids down at the kitchen table and saying, I got to tell you something. And I had a call with my people just before I did it, and then had a call with them right after. I was very fortunate that my fear was a liar, and nothing that I was afraid of came true. My sons were extremely understanding. They both said they wished they had known from the beginning, but they understood. I mean, they knew the shame that lived in our family on both sides. And so, it didn't surprise them. And I promised them that from that point on, it was like, I'm going to be truthful. Ask me whatever you want, whatever you need to know. Let me know if you need to talk to anybody, be it a therapist or, one of my friends or one of their friends' parents. I was just like, however I can facilitate that, I will. And, it's been great since then. I mean, we've had many, many conversations, and, they've shared a lot of their feelings over time as they got to process it. And, that wasn't always easy to hear, but I also knew that it was important for me to just kind of hold space and, be with them through that. And I joke that at one point, I was having another depressive episode, and my depression shows up as me being extremely tired and like needing to sleep 12 hours a day. And my emotions shut off. I don't go into the down place where I'm hard on feeling sad. I can't feel. And so my younger son at one point, he was doing therapy and, was working through his mom issues and had a boatload of stuff to tell me. And I remember sitting at the table just going like, I should probably be crying with what he's saying to me, but I'm actually kind of grateful right now that I can't feel anything, because I was able to just sit there quietly and nod and go, yeah, I hear you, and I acknowledge what you're saying, and I understand your pain. And so there was definitely a gift in that piece. So many conversations, and through all of that, realizing that, this might be the work that I need to be doing in the world, and I think this is, just how going back to what I was saying about wanting to find meaning. And, for me, that was a turnaround, that rather than being victimized by the situation, this is how I can become an advocate and heal further. And so it was, changing my mindset and saying like, I can help people because I've been through this and I've done everything the way that I hope other people won't do. And so, but I've done it all. And so I can be there without judgment. And, I can honestly say very little surprises me, just from my own life experiences. So people can bring anything to me, and I, hold them, lovingly and with complete acceptance. And so, yeah, I told my kids that this is what I thought I needed to do, and they thought that was a great idea. And so it was like, okay, now I need to share this publicly, like with everybody, that I've known my whole life. And like, I have some close friends that I grew up with that didn't know the truth. And so I told the few close friends individually, but then I actually put it on Facebook because, well, if you want everyone to know everything, that's the best way to do it. So yeah, another moment where I had a lot of fear of, wow, people are really going to judge me, and they're going to see me for the liar that I am, and all of that. And again, not true. I was just met with so much love and me too's of how many people were suffering either their own mental health challenges, their own secrets about their identity, or something that's going on in their family. And it just reinforced for me how much my work was needed. And so, yeah, I haven't stopped since then.
And love is the answer.
It always is. Yes.
It's amazing that love and truth are so related in that respect. I think years ago, where I was, because I was keeping it a secret from my children. So when I attempted suicide, my children were 11 and 15. And they didn't know what happened because they were with their mother the first half of that summer when it happened. And then when I got out of the hospital, my mother passed away. And following the funeral, then they came and spent the second half of the summer with me. But then, of course, I wasn't working and I was trying to get my life put back together. But they never knew what happened. And it was many years later when I was just so afraid. I mean, I was making such movies in my head of how they were going to react and how they were going to respond. And I still remember those, because I talked to each one of them separately, and just the love. I thought the judgment was going to be so harsh and fierce, and to your point, they were going to turn and run away, and our relationship only got better because it was based on truth. And I think it made it a little harder for my son, simply because as he's grown up now and he's 22 years old, he realizes he comes from a pretty shallow gene pool. and there's certain things that he inherited from his father's side of the family. But I think it's helpful to talk about it. Now, whether they will and they'll work through it, but at least they know that there's part of their makeup and their chemistry that they can have hard times too. But if we talk about it, we can work through it. Yeah. So I know it's extremely hard on children. My first childhood memory that I can vividly recall was when my mother attempted suicide. I believe I was about 4. And then my uncle passed away from suicide. And I think it puts it in your mind that that's an escape. And I just want all of our viewers and listeners to know that's just not the answer for your family that you leave behind. Last year I was in Eswatini. It's a little country, used to be called Swaziland, and we were all around a fire and they were talking about suicide. And one of my good friends, love him dearly, but he was like, how could you do, and I had not told my story to them specifically, but he was like, how could a parent do that to their children? If I had children and I was going through that, I would figure it out. I would never do that to my children. And I have to tell you, at the time, I was not in my right mind thinking about my children, because as I think about it now, I would never do that because I don't know that guy from 11 years ago. But it's just hard to try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in that moment for the person going through it. It's just the most amazing experience to be so disconnected from what's so important to you. Because I'm sure your husband loved you with all of his heart. He loved your children. Yeah. He would never want to do that. But
Yeah.
many times that person also feels like they're doing a favor because the world would be so much better off without them.
That was where my husband was at.
Like I'm doing the
Yeah,
world a favor by checking out,
yeah,
and we don't think about the ripple effect for generations when that happens.
yeah.
So how did you step into the light now as a coach and as a speaker? What happened in your heart from, okay, now I'm not going to lie anymore and I'm going to speak my truth, but now I'm going to be an advocate and I'm going to help people through this, because that's a huge leap of faith to rise above all of your own crap and your own issues, especially as a coactive coach and all those things to help people co-create a new life. Where did you find your
Mm.
strength? Where did you find your courage to do that?
Hmm. I think it was in the responses that I got from that Facebook post, and realizing how many people were reaching out to talk to me about what their pain was, and knowing that I had the ability to hear it all. Being somebody that has gone through such hard times, and it felt so meaningful to me, and like I was doing something good versus, this whole construct I had of myself. Before that, it was like, no, I'm helping people. I'm doing something really important. I'm that person. Like, people would tell me things that, they hadn't told a soul. And that felt like it was such a gift. That, like, wow, you are honoring me with this information. I have to I have to take this seriously. Like, this is not something that I can just ignore and walk away from. People are coming to me. They are seeing something in me that, and I've always been that person that, I meet somebody, on the bus and next to me, and suddenly they're telling me all their stuff. And so, just really realizing that, yeah, this is something that, people want to hear. They're thanking me for being a voice, when they're not yet able to do it. I know people have said to me, that hearing me speak about it and being unapologetic about it gives them the courage and inspires them that maybe one day they can get to that place. So for me, it's really a matter of, like, how can I not be doing this work? And it didn't happen overnight. It was baby steps. It was just, I just kept showing up and just kept talking, and, smaller groups and then bigger groups, individuals. And it was just, and now it's just become who I am. This is what I do. This is what I love. No greater joy than, having a call with, an individual, or doing group work where people are just feeling so seen and understood and, hopeful. That has me on a high for days. And I do this every day, so it's pretty good. But it's, and it's hard to see, because so many people have this story of, like, oh, it's such a dark place, and how could you go into this darkness all the time? It's like, yeah, but we don't live in the darkness. There's so much hope of just, like, okay, but you can have a happy life. You can be happy despite your own mental health challenges. Even if it's a family member that you're dealing with, like, you can be happy. And, and just telling people how much freedom there is on the other side of our fear and our shame. Letting go of all of that. Like, oh my God, I talk about how it was like, this backpack I was carrying around with all my shame, and it was like boulders, and it was like, oh, you have shame here, I'll take yours, because I've already got my own stuff I'm carrying. And putting it down, it was like, oh my God, like, wow. And I want everyone to feel like that. So yeah, so I can't get enough of the work that I do. I just really, and I'm so inspired by the people that come to me too, of what they, what more they want for themselves, and the freedom they find, and the work that they're doing, and how much they are growing in the world. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. I know when you and I spoke in the pre-show, you shared an experience about someone who was contemplating suicide. And then you told your story and the storm that was created in your life because of what your husband had done. And it kind of talked them off the ledge. Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about that.
Yeah, that was it was a speaking engagement I had, and I, got off the stage, and somebody who I didn't know came over and gave me a hug. And that talk was actually a very vulnerable talk. It was, I was sharing the last conversation I had with my husband, and he called me to say goodbye right before he passed away. And then I was sharing the details of that, and then all the thoughts that were running through my head, and how I was blaming myself and doing an inventory of, like, where did I go wrong somewhere along the lines to have this happen. And so I thought that this person was hugging me because they saw that, how challenging it was for me to talk about it. And we went our own ways, and then a little while later, very randomly, although I don't believe in randomness, I think we were meant to meet each other. I ran into this person again at a networking event, and we were talking more and decided to get together. And we got together for coffee. And during that time, this person shared with me that they had experienced suicidal thoughts since they were a teenager, and it was ongoing. And they never once, until they heard me talk about it, they never thought how it might impact their family. And they said that from hearing me speak, they were suddenly like, oh my God, I could never do that to them. And did, a whole, 180 on their life, eating better, taking care of their health, their mindset, all of this work, saying, like, that they were just determined not to ever go down that path. And I was like bawling my eyes out listening to that, because it was like, oh my God, like, I thought, okay, well, if there's anyone there who, was hiding the truth about a suicide, or, just having some understanding or education of, like, what happens post-suicide. Because, I think when we hear about suicides, or even in the media, we kind of think, okay, it's done and done. And we don't realize the long term effects afterwards and how it really impacts the family. So I was thinking, okay, that's who I'm impacting, not knowing that I have just, changed somebody's life for the better. And it was just so rewarding and so humbling at the same time.
To me, what you and I do is a sacred honor.
Yeah.
But I just want to remind our viewers and our listeners, if you're going through your dark night of the soul, your private hell, you are not alone, and you are enough. And there are people who have been through it. Now you've seen two sides of this, someone who attempted it and someone who had to live with a spouse who did it. There is hope. There is hope, and you're not alone. And I want you to know there's lots of resources. But as Michelle is saying, the first step is you have to tell the truth. You have to be vulnerable. I always thought vulnerability meant weakness, but I'm discovering vulnerability means courage. Vulnerability means strength. Vulnerability means authenticity. And most people hide in their lies because it's easier than living in the truth. And living in your truth is scary. But when you get through that and you get on the other side and you're living your truth, I'll tell you, there's a confidence and a peace that can only come if you're living the truth. Your thoughts on that, Michelle?
Amen to all of that. Yeah, I think it's not harder to live in our truth. I think that it's actually so much easier, because it's who we are. And it's liberating. It's liberating, even though it's painful. Like, part of being human is pain, and it's messy, and this idea of perfection, like somebody made it up and they were wrong. I say it's like it was that same generation of like where children should be seen and not heard. Those were the people that said, mental illness is a weakness and, vulnerability is a weakness. And we know that children should be heard. and so we need to rewrite the story and talk about it, because we're all, and particularly now during the pandemic, even if we don't have something that was diagnosed, we are all being challenged in one way or another in our mental health. And if, I don't believe anyone who says, oh no, I'm not, like, then you're dealing with something else, but you're, like, how can we not? Like, there is so much fear with all the unknown that we're experiencing. And so, I think that now is the time to be courageous, to talk about it, to say, yeah, I'm stressed out, like in whatever language works for you, but talk about it. Like, let's be real here.
Well, God bless you for your efforts, for your courage, for your strength to do what you're doing. I know it can be exhausting to carry the emotion that we do as we try to help audiences and individuals understand this. So I just applaud you and honor you for what you're doing and how you're doing it. You're doing it and it's first class. You're doing it with dignity. You're doing it with style and authenticity. So how can our viewers and listeners learn more about you and this story?
First of all, thank you so much. So you can find me online. My website, I think, is posted there, michelleanhangcoaching.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Michelle Anhang Coaching, LinkedIn. Any kind of social media, you're going to find me. So I'm pretty easy, as long as you can figure out my last name, which I know gets everybody.
Hooked on phonics. It's just right. Like it sounds, right?
Exactly. Anhang. Yes. So yes. So if you need support, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And to all of you viewing and listening today, keep smiling, keep shining brightly, because someone out there does need to be guided by your light.